Greetings from the Philippines and welcome. In this video, we're going to be discussing creating our first VM on a Proxmox server box. It's going to be a file server. Yeah, I'm down the hill today in Columba. It's early morning. It's just starting to get light out. People are just starting to wake up. Anyway, I thought I'd get a start on this recording as everyone else is still tucked in their beds and I'm the one who's awake. Had a little weather earlier. The rain was coming down, but it seems to have quit now. I really enjoy the way the air smells after a good rain. It's so fresh. It just washes it, it seems like. Sometimes I could wish we could just wash this whole world. Anyway, I need to quit pontificating and let's get on with the video because what you're here for is first VM on Proxmox. So as I previously stated, our first virtual machine we're going to create here is going to be a non-secure file server, and I do mean non-secure. It does not require a password. Anybody who can point their computer at it can log in. Well, not log in, they can access it because there is no login. Like I said, it's very unsecure, but again, the assumption is you're running this on your personal LAN and security is not going to be your primary driving factor or concern. One of the reasons I'm using it here is because it's fairly simple, does not require separate user accounts or separate SAMBA accounts for that matter, and it tends to work out of the box without any problems. It can also be modified easily later on. If you want to make it more secure, you can add a SAMBA user and you can force a password and all that. But our focus here is on Proxmox and creating a virtual machine, the file server, or secure, unsecure file servers subject for another video. Another possible contentious point here is this is a really, really good candidate for containerization instead of virtualization. Truth be told, I'll probably be containerizing it at some point in the future, but right now I want to do virtualization because that's the purpose of this video. Our basic process will be to download an OS, Debian 12, directly into Proxmox. If this sounds a little bit confusing, it'll make sense in a little bit. We will create or spin up a virtual machine via Proxmox GUI. Note though that we will not be running it right away. We can do some configurations while setting it up, spinning it up, whatever you want to call it, but instead we're going to modify it after we create it just to demonstrate that process. Specifically, we're going to add a second hard drive. As I said, we could do it during the creation process, but I want to do it after it's created just so people can see how to do that. Once the VM is running, we're going to add some additional programs like sudo and of course SAMBA because that's what we'll be using for sharing a directory to other computers on our network. Then we're going to configure SAMBA to make our added storage drive available across the network. Finally, we will test the file server. Again, I want to emphasize the focus here is setting up on a virtual machine, so we will probably be rushing through some of the steps for actually setting up the OS and setting up SAMBA. A lot of this was covered in other posts and other videos, but like I say, the focus here is virtual machines, so we'll be rushing through some of this. If anyone's interested in more details, please let me know. Anyway, let's get started. All right, so the first thing we're going to want to do is we want to get a hold of the Debian 12 ISO. So we need to get the URL. And then in Proxmox, we're going to go to our data center. We're going to our Elysium node, since that's where we're going to build the virtual machine. We're going to the local under the Elysium node. And then from here, we will select ISO image. And download from URL will be the button we want to use. When we have the URL, we can basically paste it into the box here and query the URL. And if we've got the whole thing. It should split it apart for us so we don't have to do it ourselves. And we can just go ahead and download, and it'll save it to our Proxmox server. It'll take a few moments to get this particular ISO, because I think the ISO is around 600 and some megabytes in size, and my network seems to be a little slow here today. Okay, the next thing I want to do is in preparation for my next video where I will do a container. So we want to go ahead and in Elysium, data center Elysium, under local, we want to select the CT templates or container templates. And then we want to select the template button from this window. This will open up a window that will show all the templates stored at the downloads.proxmox.com site. In the search box, we're going to type Debian, and then we're going to select the Debian 12 template, and we're going to go ahead and download it. Again, my network's acting up a little, so task error. Okay, redo. Yeah, anyway, we'll fuss with this and I'll get it downloaded, okay? Okay, we're going to go ahead and repeat the process as Tartarus and hopefully have a little more success. So this time it'll be data center, Tartarus, local volume, start with ISO, paste our URL, query, download. Good. Now we go to CT templates, search for Debian, Debian 12, and we download. And we're done. Now we have them on both Elysium and Tartarus. All right, before moving forward, let's just do a quick size comparison. By default, ISO files and container template files are stored under /var/lib/vz/templates. There should be two folders there. One of them is ISO, and in the ISO file, we can see that the Debian 12 installer is 629 megs. And then if we go look in the cache folder, which is where the CT templates get stored, we can see Debian 12's standard CT template is only 121 megabytes, so it's much smaller. Debian 12 standard appears to be based on 12.2, whereas the ISO is based on 12.5. This isn't a big deal. You're going to have to update them both anyway. It's just probably going to be a lot more updates for the template file because it's not quite as new as the ISO. But that's to be expected, as someone has to create the template file from the ISO itself. All right. At this point, let's go ahead and start creating our virtual machine. So blue button, create VM in the upper right-hand corner. It's going to open up the wizard. Boy, it's funny how we call these things wizards now, no matter what OS. Oh, well. So we have a node name, Elysium. We have a VM ID, which starts at 100 and works up. You can actually change this. We give the VM a name, not really using resource pool. So we jump over to the OS and we select our ISO file, which we already downloaded. it comes up as type Linux, kernel version 6.x 2.6 kernel. So over to system. One thing about the system, I'm going to be using the default C BIOS, which is legacy BIOS, instead of the UEFI BIOS. I played around with the UEFI BIOS a couple times. There's seems to be a trick to it. I haven't quite mastered it. I haven't got it working right yet. It creates an additional uh, disk, which, as I understand it, has the firmware on it. But again, I need to play with this later, so that's something for a later video. So keep things simple. We're just going to use the legacy BIOS, which is the default C BIOS. Disks, uh, 32 is really a little large, so we're going to drop it down to 20, which is probably still a little large. CPU, okay, here we got an interesting one. So sockets are actual physical sockets on your machine. If you don't have more than one physical processors, leave the sockets at one. Otherwise, the number above that will be ignored. Then you can set your number of cores. You'll notice if you set sockets to 2, it'll multiply your cores. But again, don't use sockets unless you've got actual multiple physical CPUs. For memory, we're going to go with 4 megs. And default networking, we can review our configuration. Did want to note, I sort of passed it already, but on the disk tab, you had the option to add an additional disk where we could have added the 1 terabyte hard drive we added last video at this point and had it part of the setup. But instead, I want to go ahead and go into, once the Athena VM's created, and this will take a few moments, you can go to it and you'll have your own list of options for it. If you go to hardware, you'll see there's an add button. And here we can add the disk also. So there's different places you can add the disks. So once this is done, we have the 2 disks, the 20 gig and the 1 terabyte disk. And I think we're about ready to fire this thing up. So you will notice now at this point, we have our virtual machine selected. So it's Data Center, Elysium, Athena, and you will notice we have a start button at the top. Go ahead and hit the start button at this point. And then we will jump over to Athena's console where we can actually see the installer. Let's go ahead and push this to full screen as we work through it. We're going with the text installer, select our language or territory and or key map. Wait for the network to configure. Here's a change at the host name. We're going to hit the go back and configure our IP address manually. This is a server. It needs a fixed IP address. Now we create a root password. We create a non-root user. Let the installer set up the clock and do its thing. For disk partitioning, on our boot disk, we're going to put everything in one partition. Another controversial thing I'm going to do here is add swap space. I'm not sure if this really does anything here, but I'm going to do it. Use primary partitions only. Now everything in one partition for the root directory. And then one large partition on our storage drive. And we're going to mount our storage drive to the SRV /SRV directory. I think I talked about this earlier in a video that I like to use SRV instead of MNT. Actually, it was a different video series. Okay. Finish partitioning, save our partitions. We're going to install the base system, configure APT, that's the Debian package manager. They're not going to be in the popularity contest. We're going to deselect. We're going to deselect everything in the Debian package manager except for standard system utilities, and now we're going to also select SSH server so we can SSH into our virtual machine. And then we finally set up Grub and we set it up to our boot drive. And we should be finished. We can go ahead and reboot and see if it comes up, which it does. As I said, we're going through this stuff kind of fast. So once we come up, we log in as root. We're going to do an update. Everything should be up to date since we just downloaded this ISO. We're going to add sudo so we can have administrative access for a non-root user. We're going to go ahead and check the sudo file, see if it's correct. It is. And then we're going to add our non-root user to the sudo users by adding him to the group. And we're going to go ahead and shut back down. And our server is pretty much set up. As I said, we're going through this pretty fast. All right, the next step here is to do a little tuning on our server, and we want to also install SAMBA. So first thing we want to do is go to options, and the option we're going to mess with here is the start shutdown order. Oh, excuse me, what we're going to mess with here is the start at boot. We want to change this to yes. So if our virtual machine ever goes, or say if our virtual machine server ever goes down, and when it comes back up, the server will also come back up. And we're going to, at this point, go ahead and SSH into our server. We'll get our standard SSH warning, but we were able to successfully log in. Let's take a look at our block map, and you can see we've got 18.1 gigabytes in our root partition, and we've got our server partition with 978 gigabytes. And another look at the file system using df-h. All right, since we're SSH'd in at this point, let's go ahead and get SAMBA installed. So sudo apt install SAMBA. Yes, installed. Check the status, make sure SAMBA is running. Going to go ahead and stop SAMBA. Check to make sure it's inactive. Then we're going into the etc SAMBA folder. This is the default SAMBA file that comes with Debian. It's really kind of scary for a lot of new people. There's a lot of stuff in here. We're going to move it to backup, and we're going to create one from scratch is what we're going to do. So again, our primary purpose was setting up a VM here. We're not going to get too in-depth in detail for SAMBA, but just so it's here, this is the configuration file I am using. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 lines long. It's not overly complicated, and it's not very secure. Okay. We're going to create a folder. We have our shared in our server directory, and Now we need to jump out of this, and we need to go ahead and map the network drive to the SAMBA server virtual machine to the SRV/shared folder. You can see we got a document here called new text document.txt. If we look in our server.shared folder, you can also see that same document, new text document.txt. So we're sharing them back and forth. You can have permissions, like I say, it's not secure. You don't need a password. You can write to it. You can delete things, whatever. It's just like a folder on your own computer. Maybe not quite as fast, but you get the idea. Okay, there we are. We've created our first virtual machine, a file server running under Proxmox. We modified it. We loaded an OS. We established some useful functionality. So I'd say we're off to a pretty good start so far. We did download a container version of Debian 12 as well as the actual OS. We looked at the difference in the size between the container and the full OS. This is basically because the container relies on the host system's kernel infrastructure and doesn't have one of its own, whereas the OS is everything all in one. I was planning on doing the backup server next, but I think I will instead create the DNS server and a container on the Tartarus node. That way I can make sure I have remote access. Right now, like I say, down the valley, don't have access because I don't have Cloudflare set up. But yeah, I think I'm going to do that next. Like I say, it'll be a DNS server. One of the functions will be Cloudflare, the other will be caching DNS, and of course, it'll run the ad blocker Pi-hole. So that's the plan for the next video. Hopefully, it'll be out in a week or two. So I hope you stop by and check it out once it's released. And I hope you enjoyed this video. And as always, if you did enjoy it, give a like, a subscribe, or leave a comment. Anyway, thanks for being here.